it was also just shameful to admit that I was wrong after so much time, especially since I didn't even look like a girl anymore by that point.
Right. Yeah, well, it's quite remarkable in some sense that you did reverse your decision, and you seem to be indicating to me that it was the realization that you wanted to have children that was the real telling moment of transformation, was it?
It was definitely one of the biggest catalysts.
And how do you think you figured that out? Because that, it's actually pretty young to figure that out. I mean, I've met many women now who, there's lots of women your age who are absolutely hell-bent and convinced that they're never going to have kids, that the only pathway forward to them that's valid is the career pathway. But I'll tell you that, I'm 60 years old now, and I've worked with women in female-dominated businesses my whole life, because I'm in the psychological profession, and so that's female-dominated. And virtually every woman I've ever met, with almost no exceptions, and this includes extremely high-achieving women on the career front, pretty much by the time they're in their late 20s, their primary goal is to have a child. And that's even the case now. Sometimes that kicks in for women later than that. I've seen that as well, but it's an extremely rare woman who goes through her entire young life without being seized by the desire to have a child. And so, but it's early in your case. So, and it's strange, right, in some ways, because you'd fought against this so hard. Why the hell do you think it made itself manifest as a desire when you were 16? Like, do you think you knew that you were really like on the cutting edge in some sense, that if you kept pushing this, you were really going to sacrifice your ability to have kids? Or what do you think produced the realization?
I think, I already had my guard down by that point, because this was around when COVID hit and there were all the restrictions put in place, and I was basically doing online school only, and I had a lot of isolation from the outside world, and this caused me a significant amount of stress, but it also allowed for a lot more time to be alone and reflect, and so it opened up my mind a little bit. Mm-hmm. And
so what were you fantasizing about on the family front when you were looking forward into the future? You were thinking about having. Did you have some idea of how many kids you wanted to have? Did you have some idea about the marriage or the family structure? What was making itself manifest in your fantasy?
I mean, when I started, I was so young that I wasn't even thinking about all that yet. But as years passed and I started to think about my adulthood, what I wanted to do as an adult, that thought started to pop into my head a little bit more. I never really thought about it very much until I learned about child psychology and just being a parent. I think I would have naturally had that realization if I knew more about parenting and family.
Hey, do you know when you were a kid, do you know if you played with dolls?
Yeah, I did.
You did? Okay, so that was there. Can you remember whether or not you enjoyed that? I know that's a long time
Yeah,
ago.
I did.
And were they baby dolls or were they
They were Barbies and Bratz.
Okay, so they were teenage dolls. Did you have any baby dolls?
Not that I can remember.
Okay. See, that's interesting. Even among chimpanzees, if you allow chimpanzee juveniles free choice, the males will pick trucks and wheeled things and gadgets, and the females will pick dolls. And the female chimps will carry the dolls around, teddy bears and so forth, for months and develop a very deep attachment to them. And, one of the things, it's really necessary for young girls, and perhaps for young boys, but certainly for young girls, to play with baby dolls. It's really necessary, because that's all part of that practicing that deep female role. And, without that, well, you don't have a chance. That's how kids think, eh? They think by playing, and if they don't have a chance to play that out, then, well, they don't explore that. And so it didn't even make it manifest in your own life until you were like 16 and had gone through all this bloody misery. All right, so when did you start thinking about taking legal action, and why do you think that's justifiable?
That was quite a bit further down the line. I should probably go into first about the detransition process for me, what led up to me eventually starting to speak out and doing that, yeah. When I had this realization, I mean, that night when I broke down and I talked to my friend and my mom and my dad about it, that was the night that I stopped taking testosterone, and I decided that I would just grow my hair out and buy new clothes and just figure things out from there. I went for about a week, just not really doing anything. I was just kind of at rock bottom at that point, and I didn't really see a reason to do anything all day. Didn't really go out except to use the restroom or get some food, but Mom and Dad would come and check in on me, and it was comforting, and that kept me going. And then I had to figure out everything from there pretty much on my own. I told my endocrinologist, I told my therapist, my endocrinologist, and my gender specialist that I regretted my transition very deeply, that I was going to stop, and I didn't really get a whole lot of guidance on it. I guess they really couldn't, because it would be against the law to suggest anything other than...
Well, that's a tricky one, right? Because, well, hypothetically, once you announce that, they're also legally bound to go along with that, right? So they could have agreed with you. I mean, look, I have a certain amount of sympathy for counselors and medical practitioners, because they're facing supreme hell on their regulatory college front. But having said that, I would also say that their fundamental duty of care is to the individual and not to the bloody regulating colleges. And so, but they could have taken your regrets seriously. You said that, did you face opposition, or was it just a matter of lack of guidance?
It was mostly a lack of guidance. Nobody really opposed it, but I started requesting blood tests from my endocrinologist, and when I got I specifically told her that I no longer identify as male, and I want the guidelines for a female my age. And when I got the results back, they were sent with the guidelines for the average sex hormone levels for a teenage boy. So that was kind of that was one of the first moments that really woke me up to the fact that these people weren't going to help me.
Well, it's weird, because if your medical people were so convinced that you were 100% right when you decided to transition to begin with, and you were right enough to take the hormones and have the surgery, you'd think that there'd be some resistance to your sudden change of heart. But it sounds like you basically encountered the same lackadaisical response to the second decision that you did to the first decision. So, which it's not surprising, although it's horrible.
Yeah, it was basically entirely patient-led.
Right. Okay, so, all right, so you decided to take legal action, and so walk us through that.
Yeah, earlier this year, I started to start speaking out publicly about my experience with transitioning and then stopping transition. Before that, I actually had lost a lot of friends, both from school and online, over it, over the course of my detransition, because a lot of them, I had a pretty strong change in a lot of my views, and a lot of them disagreed with me heavily, and they were very upset with me. There was one person who kept harassing me just because I regretted it, and said that I deserved to feel that way, that I didn't deserve to have parents who loved me enough to let me go through this. And there were a lot of others who said that I was just making them uncomfortable, and that I shouldn't be voicing any of this because it would be harming other real transgender people who needed this treatment. And I did, yeah.
Real ones, I see.
I gave into this pressure, and I did stop talking about it for a while, but I also got involved in communities online of people who regretted their transitions, and I realized that that wasn't the case at all, and that I just couldn't shut up, because this is something that's happening more often than even I thought was happening. I didn't even know that detransition was a thing until it happened to me. And I knew that there's got to be so many other people in the situation, especially kids who are being pressured by their friends to stay silent about their pain. And it's not necessarily that I want to speak out about it, but I feel called to. And so I started this year. And
what do you think is the core of your claim that you fell prey to, say, medical and counseling malpractice? What do you think was done wrong with you?
Quite a lot, actually. The most immediate thing I can think of would be the fact that the consent forms weren't really comprehensive. They were very vague. They didn't list they didn't have nearly enough information on them, and I was also just too young to really fathom what any of this meant. And they, you can make the argument that my parents...
Well, consent has to be documented, but it also has to be informed. And informed means you have to understand what you're consenting to. And so from my perspective, especially when you were really young, say around 12, and you first went into therapy, there should have been a very deep investigation into your background, and then a laying out of a whole comprehensive range of options, and a lengthy discussion of the consequence of all of those options. And your parents, after the discussion had taken place with you, your parents should have been brought into that, and they should have been walked through the same range of options. And then you all should have been offered, what would I say, the opportunity or the necessity to take a fair amount of time to really think it through, on the fundamental basis that, we won't do anything precipitous until it's necessary, right? And that harkens back to the idea that if you leave most kids with gender dysphoria be, most of them identify as homosexual, as I said, eventually, but most of them, the vast majority of them, accept their biological status. And so the consent issue, it isn't only that the forms were vague and didn't detail out the full range of consequences, it's that you needed to be walked through in great detail all of the issues that were relevant to you on the psychological and medical front, all the options that were available to you, and the pros and cons of all those options. And that should have been something that took, I would think that I can't see in any possible way that could have been done with any degree of thoroughness in something under 6 months of weekly therapy. And I would say that's an absolute minimum to walk anyone through something as complicated as what you laid out. So that's on the informed front, right?
Yeah, they really presented this as basically the only option to both me and my parents. And I also, the problem with me starting it so young was not only that I couldn't consent, I couldn't really fathom the full picture of things. I'm still experiencing a wide range of complications to this day. From the surgery, I'll never be able to breastfeed. I'll never have that erogenous sensation in my chest back. I'll never have my breast back. A reconstruction will do nothing for me, and it might make things worse actually, because I've had some complications pop up this year with the grafts. I have to cover them up with bandages, or else I don't know what's going on with them. I tried to consult my surgeon about it, and he didn't really investigate. he gave me advice that made the complications worse even, and actually temporarily gave me an infection. But I have to bandage up every day so that it doesn't like leak all over my clothing or bedding. And
Jesus.
From the hormones and blockers, I've been experiencing some joint pains, mainly in my arms, my legs, and my back. And
Yeah.
I still have issues with my urinary tract. I have to use the restroom pretty frequently, and I didn't even know that this was possible. This is like a pretty huge quality of life issue that I'm experiencing, and I'm just not really getting any help for it. And on top of that, I do hate to speak about it, but I'm experiencing sexual dysfunction at the age of 18. That's something that women usually go through when they're in their 40s to 50s.
Right.
How is this supposed to know?
So let's talk for a moment about how you got your lawyers and where you are on the legal battlefront.
So, not only is what's happened to me completely unethical, completely wrong, it's caused me a lot of physical damage and emotional damage as well. I'm still picking up the pieces of my life to this day, and I often find myself feeling like a broken woman, all because of a choice that I made, that I was allowed to make as a kid. And I think it's very clear just how wrong all this is. None of this should have been allowed to happen.
What has happened legally? Have you served a set of people with notice that you're taking legal proceedings, and or are you still in the planning stages of that?
So we've filed a letter of intent to sue against Kaiser, my healthcare provider, as well as the hospital that I underwent the surgery at. And the surgeon who did it, the gender specialist who referred me to that surgeon, and the endocrinologist who had put me on hormones. We're still in the 90-day period.
Right. So this is all just unfolding now. So you're going to end up with a pretty damn thorough medical and legal education by the time you're done all of this, and media education as well. That's for sure.